Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and welcome to Benchmark. We'll explore a variety of issues involving our legal system, our justice system, and how they intersect with the citizens of the town of Colonie. Today, we're truly fortunate to have an opportunity to best explore the New York State court system through the eyes of one of our top jurists in the state of New York. Many of us recognize that the state court system is primarily comprised of three separate levels. The first level being the Supreme Court level, the trial court level of our state court system. Then there's the appellate division of the Supreme Court, and lastly, the highest court in the state of New York, the New York State Court of Appeals. Today, it is our great honor for the entire town of Colonie to be joined by Court of Appeals Judge Victoria Graffeo. Judge Graffeo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Judge Crummey. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to the residents of Colonie.
Well, we're so excited, and we're only limited by time and space because you have so much to tell us about the Court of Appeals and your own background and experience. Judge, many of our viewers want to know, how did you become a judge at the highest court in the state of New York?
Well, I had positions in three branches of government at the state level. I worked in the legislature, I worked at a state agency, and then my last job in state government was as Solicitor General for the Attorney General, Dennis Vacco. And while I was Solicitor General, I considered a run for a Supreme Court seat. So I ran in the 3rd Judicial District, and I served on the trial bench, and then I was appointed by Governor Pataki to the appellate division. And then I applied to the Court of Appeals, and there's an interview process and a selection process, and I was very fortunate and was nominated by the governor for the Court of Appeals, and I serve a 14-year term.
Well, the entire state is benefiting by your knowledge and background in this way. When I was a young prosecutor here for our town of Colonie, I believe that you were even in private practice here in the town of Colonie, and I think that you had occasion to come into the Colonie Town Court.
Yes, I did. I practiced for a number of years at Tate, Bishko, Miller, and Ruthman on Central Avenue in Colonie, and I have spent many, many nights in the Colonie Justice Court.
Well, the activity continues here in the Colonie Town Court, but we're here today to learn so much about the Court of Appeals. When I was in law school, I was taught early on that the most significant state court in the country was the New York State Court of Appeals. And we all still believe that today. Plays an integral role in our state government, and you've seen it from all sides. You've served in the executive and the legislative and now the judiciary as well. How many judges join you on the Court of Appeals?
Our court is comprised of seven judges. The chief judge is the Honorable Judith S. Kay. She was the first woman ever appointed to the court. And then there are 6 associate judges. I am one of those 6. And we have 4 females that now serve on the court, which is quite a difference from several decades ago.
Judge, in that way, are there certain times of year that the court is in session, or is it always in session? How does it work procedurally in that way?
We hear cases 11 months of the year. The only month that we don't have oral arguments is July. And generally we're in session about 2 weeks every month.
Judge, you mentioned too that the position of being named to the Court of Appeals is a long and deep selection process and review. Ultimately, a recommendation by the governor and
Senate confirmation.
Senate confirmation. Wasn't there a time, though, when the Court of Appeals judges were elected statewide?
Yes, until the late 1970s, and then it switched to an appointive system. In our state, Most of our trial level judges, at least in upstate New York, are elected, but the Court of Appeals is an appointed body. And you don't have to be a judge in order to be nominated for the Court of Appeals. So 2 of the judges that serve on our court were not trial judges. They came from litigation practices to the court.
I've had opportunity to come to the Court of Appeals a number of different times, and its home base is right here in Albany, New York, which is a very exciting venue for all of us here. And was the building a former Capitol building, or what's the history of the building itself?
We have a beautiful historic building in Albany. We're situated at 20 Eagle Street. We're between Albany City Hall and the Albany County Courthouse. And the building was erected in 1842 as a state office building. And it's a very interesting history of our courtroom because it was built in the early 1880s and it was situated in the state capitol building. And the court outgrew the space in the state capitol building, and in 1917 they moved the courtroom board for board, including the beautiful onyx fireplace, and they retrofitted everything into State Hall, and now it's known as Court of Appeals Hall.
Now, during your deliberations in the courtroom, is the public invited to attend?
Yes, all of our sessions are public. Also, we are filmed so that there are tapes available of all the cases that are heard in our court. We also do webcasting of the significant cases so that the public has an opportunity to be able to see those arguments. And it's a beautiful courthouse. It's a public building. I would encourage your residents, if they're downtown, to stop in and take a look at our beautiful courtroom.
Judge, how do cases come to the Court of Appeals? Many of us recognize that in the federal system, the top court being the Supreme Court in the federal system, I believe that court can choose which case it decides to hear. Is that akin to what happens in New York, or is your jurisdiction different?
It's quite similar to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is a certiorari court, and we also have the opportunity to select most of our docket. There are some types of cases that come to our court what we call as of right. They will have the ability to not have to have us decide whether or not to hear that case. That arises primarily where there's 2 judges at the appellate division have dissented on a case. That case will automatically be heard by our court. But for the most part, we are able to decide which criminal and civil cases we feel are of statewide importance to be heard.
Now, how do you make those decisions? Do you collectively meet with the other judges and make those decisions? Or how is it decided what case the court may hear?
We have 2 different processes for civil cases and criminal cases. We have a very broad spectrum of cases in New York State. Our court hears everything from what I would say private family matters, divorce, custody, support, right straight through to very complicated and sophisticated financial and commercial cases, personal injury cases, contract cases, and all kinds of crimes. So there's quite a broad array of requests from different kinds of decisions that have been issued by the 4 appellate divisions in New York State. And what we do, we have 2 different processes. Civil cases are decided by all of the judges at conference. We discuss each of those cases, and 2 out of 7 judges have to vote to grant leave to appeal. But in the criminal arena, the cases are assigned to individual judges, and we review the cases in our own chambers, and then an individual judge can decide whether that case is appropriate.
All right, so a little different as you compare civil and as opposed to criminal cases. What's the theory behind that? Is it that the criminal case does involve certainly the removal of someone's, could potentially involve the removal of someone's rights or possible incarceration, and therefore there's a different level of review as to whether to hear the case?
And I think it's just our historic practice has been that way. And it also, there's a lot more involved sometimes in reviewing the criminal cases. There's different ramifications. It just happens to be one of the traditions of our court.
Well, do you find that oftentimes what you're considering is the application of the state constitution? Does that come into play many times in your deliberations, and what the drafters were thinking at that point in time?
Oh, certainly. That constitutional issues arise in both venues, whether it's criminal or civil.
Right.
That's a large part of our case law. And that would be one of the factors we would look at in deciding whether a case is of statewide import. We're also very concerned if there have been conflicting decisions from two different parts of the state, because we're trying to also establish uniform rules of law for all New Yorkers.
Well, certainly the Court of Appeals in the state of New York has a long and cherished tradition of adjudicating matters and setting policy and or interpretation of law, not only for New York State, but as a fit example for the rest of the country. And in that way, I think, was it the Court of Appeals in its current form was actually established in the mid-1800s? Is that about right?
Yes, the
Okay.
state constitution in 1846 pretty much constituted the court as we know it now.
Well, it's been a dynamic venue for some time, and certainly well respected and continues to be that way. After you've heard a case, and after the entire court has heard the oral argument and considered the papers, is there a time when the judges reconvene in conference to consider a potential decision?
Yes, let me preface my answer to that by giving a little background as to how we conduct our sessions. Since we are not a trial court, we are a court of law. There's no jury or testimony in our court. We are reading the record of the proceedings from the courts below. And before the cases are argued by attorneys who engage pretty much in a question and answer discussion with the members of the court, we have no idea what cases are going to be assigned to us, what cases we are going to read, so all the judges are fully prepared on each case before oral argument, and we're going to be asking the attorneys any of the legal issues or questions that we have that pertain to that case. After we're done with the oral arguments, and the chief judge sets the amount of time that's given each case, we then meet in a conference room. And we have a very cherished tradition at the court that we call our random assignment system. And the judges, by seniority, pull index cards off a table similar to this. And that gives us the name of a case that was argued that day. And then our job, if you pull that case, is to prepare that case that evening to present at conference the next morning. So each day that our court is in session, we spend the mornings in conference and the judges confer. And one of the judges will report on the case. We will lay out what we think is the appropriate disposition of that case. And then the chief judge will have everyone comment on the case, and we will slowly determine whether or not there's a majority of 4 out of 7 who feel the same way about the case. And if that's so, then the judge who reported that case will prepare the first draft of the opinion of that case for consideration.
Do you find that discussion with the other members of the court actually can provide certain background and experiences that have caused you to look at issues in a different way, relying on what other people had to say? I mean, do we learn by this experience?
Yes, absolutely. We have a very collegial court. Chief Judge Kaye has worked very hard. Although we have very spirited disagreements, we have great respect for each other, and we learn a great deal from each other. Each judge brings their own professional and personal experiences to the table, and we try to come up with what we think is the most just and the best resolution of each case for the people of the state of New York. And it's a collaborative process. Once if I write an opinion in a case, it gets emailed to all my colleagues, and they will comment on that writing, and they will decide if they're comfortable enough with it to vote for it, or if they feel strongly the other way, and they want to write a concurrence or a dissent or something of that nature. So we are always in communication with each other. There's a great deal of discussion about the cases.
Do you find that oftentimes you're working well into the evening, working on particular decisions, for instance, or other court business? Will that happen from time to time as well?
We put in a lot of hours at the court. When our court is in session, we're working from morning right straight through. Most of the judges are there until about 10 o'clock in the evening.
Now, Judge, I can tell you that certainly the attorneys that appear before the court in oral argument, they're limited by time, and you said that the Chief Judge will assign a time for each party for the particular oral argument. And of course, certainly there's a lot of anxiety on the attorneys as they present their case, and you've told us too that the Court of Appeals is a hot bench, meaning that all judges have already become familiar with all of the documents ahead of time,
yes,
which certainly allows for spirited back and forth or question and answer right out of the box sometimes when an attorney stands up and starts to present his or her argument, oral argument, right away questions can start coming from the bench. And is that routine, the way it usually works?
It's a vigorous experience to be at the Court of Appeals. We don't have the attorneys talk about the facts of the case because we've studied that in the weeks between our sessions. So we get right into the nitty-gritty issues of the case and what we want to know about the case and what rule of law would be best for the state of New York.
Well, it's a challenging time, but it also helps the synergy and the tension between the arguments and the law certainly help bring to fruition the best results.
Well, and we ask a lot of hypothetical questions of the attorneys so that we're testing their propositions to see how that particular rule of law will apply in other fact patterns.
Judge, how many cases a year will your court hear?
We will issue written opinions in about 200 cases a year. And that's out of probably over 4,000 requests for motions for leave to appeal. The U.S. Supreme Court probably did less than 100 cases last year. So we have a pretty large caseload. We have a very significant caseload. But we're also very proud of the efficiency of our court because once a case is argued in our court, we, in almost all instances, will hand down the written decision the following month. When the judges come back to Albany, we will take our final vote on a decision, and then it's immediately handed down. And those opinions are automatically and quickly available to the public. There's a New York Court of Appeals website, and we publish all of our written opinions, as well as our court rules and other information about the court, so that the public can access that information right away. So the litigants and the attorneys find out within 40 days of when they've argued their case in most instances. So that's a very quick turnaround in terms of high courts across the nation and the U.S. Supreme Court and other federal courts. So we work very hard to have that kind of immediate information and decision-making back to the parties.
Well, Judge, we're so lucky in the Capital Region to have you call the Capital Region home, but your colleagues come from across the state, is that correct?
Yes, yes. Well, Judge Susan Reed is from Rensselaer County, so she's the other Capital District jurist. But of course, Chief Judge Judith Kay, Carmen Beauchamp-Saparic, and Robert Smith are all New York City residents, and Theodore Jones is from Rockland County, and Eugene Pickett is from Erie County.
Do you think that geography has ever brought an interesting viewpoint to the table on a particular matter in any way, or whether it's never had any moment whatsoever?
I think it's important to have some geographical variety in the judges on our court because there's different local practices around the state. The practice of law is a bit different, and that brings a certain different flavor to our discussions because we all have a different experience. Especially, we have many cases that involve legal procedures, and it's important for us to know what's going on in the trial court. So this way, some of us on the court have served on trial benches, and that way we bring that experience to our discussions.
Now, you were first elected to the Supreme Court, which is the trial level of our state court system, in the mid-90s. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, have you found that that service as a Supreme Court judge has been an asset to you serving our highest court today?
I think in my case, yes, it was. It's not essential. We obviously have great judges that are serving and have served on the court that were not bench judges. But for me, I find that it gives me a better understanding of what our judges go through in New York State. And we have quite a variety of trial courts in New York State, because besides our Supreme Court,
yes,
we have our family courts, county courts, surrogate courts, court of claims, all our city, town, and village courts, which you're most familiar with. So there are a lot of courts that are funneling their cases up through the appellate process.
And I agree that there's a tremendous volume at all levels in that way. Judge, you've had the benefit of serving all three branches of state government, certainly. And are there major differences in what you saw each one fit into the other? I know you spent a significant amount of time in the state legislature, not only, I think, with the state assembly, but also the Senate as well, or the Assembly?
No, I worked a decade in the Assembly.
Yep.
I was chief counsel to the Assembly Minority Leader as my last position there. I think each branch of government has a different role. The executive branch is kind of a policy maker. It's the governor's responsible for developing the state budget. The legislature, I think, has the closest connection to the people. That's where people go to try to seek legislative resolution to whatever their difficulties are. The legislature, of course, our legislature is extremely active in New York State. There are many, many bills passed a year, so we always have new laws that are being tested and challenged. And the judicial responsibility is to determine the legality of those enactments. And I think the three branches working together create a very effective democracy. But each has their own special role, and ours is to be independent of the other two, and that's a very important aspect of our work. I have to kind of close off some of my past experiences and look at some of these cases from an independent viewpoint.
Judge, a few springs ago, I took the family down to Washington, D.C., and we visited the Supreme Court. And I came to learn then that actually to be a Supreme Court justice, I don't believe you have to be an attorney. I don't think that's a requirement. And I wondered whether in our own state, our top court, the Court of Appeals, the Constitution does require that you be an attorney. I think
Yes.
that's the way it is.
Yes.
Right. And I was surprised to learn. And I think the last non-attorney that was appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States was 1940 or thereabouts. But I was surprised that could be the case nonetheless. Do you find in that your background and your legal experience, starting as a graduate of Albany Law School,
Yes.
which is my alma mater as well, that's all very much important to understanding the issues that are before you?
Yes, I think that our court benefits from each of us having different professional backgrounds and experiences, and you can't separate the judicial part of you from the person that you are. So we bring these characteristics to the table, and it's very interesting. In cases that we've handled in the past decades of our legal careers, I think they leave an impression on you, and you handle that. I think first and foremost, we always think about the people involved in our cases. It's even though we're dealing with written records and attorneys in our court, we don't have the actual litigants sitting there 3 feet away from us like a trial judge does. We have to always remember that these cases are primarily about people.
There's no question about that, and it's so refreshing to hear that the focus on the court system is about the people, and that will continue certainly with your presence here in the Court of Appeals. Any ideas of what the court system might look like in 100 years? Any ideas? I know that before the state legislature, from time to time, there were recommendations of possibly consolidating many of the state-level trial courts, maybe consolidating the family court with the Supreme Court and the surrogate court, and designating one type of judge, maybe known as a Supreme Court judge, for all those particular courts. I don't know whether that's still under consideration, and I think it does involve possibly state legislation and could involve an amendment to our Constitution. I don't know.
There's been, for many years, Chief Judge Kaye has proposed a court consolidation plan because New York State has a very complicated morass almost of courts in New York, and for certain kinds of cases, people end up being in more than one court, and that creates added expense and added time. The legislature has not been receptive to that plan yet, so the Chief Judge has worked very hard to develop what we call problem-solving courts, and probably the best example of this is our integrated domestic violence courts. Previously, if a family was subject to domestic violence, the woman might have to go to a criminal court in connection with whatever crimes her abuser was charged with. She might have to go to family court to deal with custody and support issues. And if she wanted a divorce, she would have to go to Supreme Court because that's the only court that can dissolve the marriage. So you have this family bouncing between 3 different courts, and it was very confusing for people, very complicated. So we now have a new system in most of our counties, and we more or less assign one judge to one family type of a concept, so that one judge will handle the criminal, the family court, and the other matrimonial issues pertaining to that family. So we have done problem-solving courts to deal with drug offenders. We have our drug treatment courts where there's very close supervision maintained of individuals to try to get them back into a more productive lifestyle. We've just started mental health courts to deal with the recidivism for some individuals that have mental health problems. So the court system has been trying new and innovative ideas, and New York is quite on the forefront of that.
Well, I think that you've hit on a very large issue confronting our court system, because routinely in my own court I will see crossover from the criminal matter to the family court matter, and routinely I will see that. And the other issue that seems to percolate throughout so much of my court agenda is a matter of addiction. And that continues to generate so much court activity, either through arrests or other brushes with the court system, and it continues to grow in that way. And the court system, the focus on the court system that Judge Kaye has brought through the Court of Appeals will certainly help in that way, because it does continue. I look up and I see standing room only in the courthouse, and routinely I believe the best courtroom is an empty one. But it continues, and it's not just criminal, it's civil matters too.
Yes.
Have you seen an increased volume at your level as well, not necessarily in the cases that you ultimately choose to take, but on the petitions for your approval to be reviewed by the Court of Appeals? Is that increasing, the number of applications for your review?
I would say it has stayed pretty consistent
Okay.
over the last 5 to 6 years. We've had some increase this year. Of course, because our lower courts get busier, we will get more leave applications. What I think is probably one of the saddest aspects is the number of child abuse and child neglect petitions that I review every week. That's a very sad state of affairs, that we have children that are in these really sad situations. So our court system is working very hard to try to provide better services to the families, and also to provide more oversight of the remedial steps being taken to try to help these children and their families, or their foster families, as the case may be.
Well, Judge, we're so fortunate that you've had an opportunity to join us today to tell us about the most significant state court in the United States of America, that being the Court of Appeals. We're so fortunate to have Judge Victoria Graffeo with us today to talk about the court system and its deliberations. And certainly we look forward to having you back, Judge, at your convenience again. You're so nice to take the time to come over and join the citizens of the town of Colonie in this way. We're so proud to call you one of our own. And
well, it's been a pleasure, and I definitely invite everyone to stop down and to see our deliberations in our beautiful courthouse. It belongs to the people.
Thank you very much for continuing to distinguish our Court of Appeals by your service on behalf of the citizens of the state of New York. I'm Judge Peter Crummey, and thank you for joining me on Benchmark.